The thick silence that enveloped the home in the tranquil suburbs of Los Angeles was abruptly interrupted by a haunting guitar melody. Jake's ears were immediately drawn to the peculiar and unfamiliar melody, causing him to halt in mid-step on the staircase. The music was not what he was accustomed to, as it was neither steady nor cheerful. Rather, it was heavy and fragmented, resembling a muffled lament concealed within each note. He instinctively directed his gaze upward, towards the chamber from which the music emanated. Emily. Jake was agitated by the mere mention of the name. She had arrived yesterday, bringing with her a completely distinct energy that disrupted the previously predictable cadence of this household. Jake was unable to forget the memory of her arrival. She exited the sleek, expensive vehicle with a calm, detached demeanor, her gaze unwavering and unapologetic. Jake experienced a sense of invisibility within his own residence. She had only briefly observed him, offering him a transient, almost dismissive expression, before departing without giving him a second thought. However, Emily's music now seemed to transport him to an entirely different realm. Jake cautiously began ascending the stairs, his steps deliberately light, as if he was apprehensive that the sound would vanish if he moved too rapidly. The melody intensified as he approached Emily's room, swelling with intense emotion. The music abruptly ceased as he approached her door. The house appeared to be frozen, as if it were holding its breath at that precise instant. "You intend to remain in that location for the duration of the night." Her voice, which was silky and tinged with sarcasm, penetrated the silence. Jake trembled. She emerged from behind the closed door. Emily's piercing blue eyes were illuminated by the gentle light of her bedroom as she stood in the doorway. She wore an oversized band t-shirt that Jake did not recognize, and her brown hair flowed casually over her shoulders. The shirt appeared to accentuate her untamed, effortless style. However, it was her gaze that truly disturbed him. It was cold, piercing, and cutting, as if it could cut through him. Jake, experiencing a surge of heat on his face, abruptly stated, "I was not eavesdropping. It is merely your instrument. It does not appear to be pleasant." Emily's lips curled into a smirk that was devoid of tenderness, and she raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? That is not precisely a glowing endorsement of my music, but I suppose I should appreciate it." She inclined her head slightly, examining him as if he were a puzzle that she was not particularly interested in solving. She then added, "Jake, correct? A calm individual who resides in this location?" Jake felt the sharpness of her words as he pressed his lips together, but he refrained from reacting. He was not particularly adept at delivering comebacks, particularly when confronted with an individual such as Emily, who exuded confidence in a manner that caused others to withdraw. "I am Jake," he murmured, his voice scarcely audible. Emily's arms were crossed as she leaned against the doorframe. "Fascinating. I did not perceive you as an individual who would be interested in music. You appear to be rather closed off." Jake was able to maintain his composure, despite the fact that her words felt like a needle piercing his pride. "I am merely inquiring. The sound of your music is emotional." Emily's irises briefly became more empathetic. However, it vanished as rapidly as it had appeared. "Emotional, is that right?" "Potentially. However, emotions are not something I am inclined to disclose to just anyone." She then turned her back to him, retreated to her room, and closed the door before Jake could say anything else. The melody was more intense this time, as the sound of her instrument filled the air moments later. Almost stormy. It was as though a tempest had been unleashed. Jake was anchored to the spot, his mind ablaze with inquiries. What was the reason for her apparent burden? How could an individual who emanated such fortitude produce music that evoked such a sense of fragility? Eventually, he retired to his bedroom. However, the sound of Emily's instrument continued to resonate in his consciousness for an extended period of time after he had shut the door. It was akin to a whisper in the darkness, a component of a conundrum that he was unable to solve. And although he would not acknowledge it, Emily had roused a part of him that he was not yet prepared to identify. Was it curiosity? Or perhaps something more profound, something that is more akin to yearning? Jake was unaware that Emily's instrument served as a prelude rather than mere music. A subtle forewarning of the intricate and perilous emotions that were about to unravel, engulfing them in a storm from which they could not flee. Jake was unable to fall asleep that evening. Emily's guitar continued to resonate in his consciousness, as if each note had been permanently imprinted on his memory. He was lying on his bed, gazing at the ceiling, his chest heaving with an unexplainable sense of restlessness. Not only did Emily enter the house with a defiant confidence, but her music resonated in a manner that Jake was unable to fully comprehend. It was not merely oppressive, it was also eerie. A cry for assistance was concealed beneath each lingering chord. Jake arrived at the kitchen earlier than usual the following morning. Emily was already present, seated at the table with a coffee cup in front of her, much to his astonishment. She did not speak, rather she lightly tapped her fingers on the table in an imaginary rhythm, her eyes fixated on the window. Jake observed a significant difference in her for the first time. She had lost her characteristic air of indifference. In the soft morning light, her countenance revealed a subtle melancholy that he was unable to identify. Jake's voice broke the silence as he greeted the morning. Emily's penetrating blue eyes fixed on him as she turned to gaze at him. Her voice was gruff, as if it were burdened by the weight of a sleepless night, as she curtly replied, "Good morning." Jake slid into the seat opposite her, grasping his coffee cup as if to stabilize himself. The silence between them was not hostile, however it was dense with unspoken thoughts. He finally broke it, his tone gentle but tinged with inquiry. "Last night you played your instrument. It was enjoyable." Despite Emily's laughter, it was not one that was characterized by pleasure. "Is everything fine? I am of the opinion that you are not fully comprehending the situation." Jake expressed a minor frown. "What do you mean?" When Emily took a sip of her coffee, her gaze momentarily met his before it drifted to a distant location. "Music composed by me. It is not for recreational purposes. It is my method of evasion. However, reality is perpetually present, anticipating my arrival, regardless of how much I engage in recreation." Jake was unsure of how to respond. The unvarnished honesty that underpinned her words was palpable to him. Something was simmering beneath her surface, something that was ensnared in that she was unable to escape. However, before he could inquire further, Emily placed her coffee down and reclined in her chair. "Do you ever experience the sensation of not belonging anywhere?" she inquired with a voice that was both low and piercing, as if it were a blade that was cutting through his thoughts. Jake was paralyzed. He was deeply moved by the inquiry, which resonated with aspects of himself that he had never previously disclosed to anyone. Indeed, he acknowledged in a low voice, consistently. Emily's leer was not intended to be mocking. It was fatigued, as if she had accepted a reality that they both comprehended. "Well, at least we share that." She rose from her seat and proceeded to the wash basin to dispose of her empty coffee cup. Jake observed her actions, her assurance concealing a sense of isolation that he could sense but could not fully comprehend. He hesitated for a moment, uncertain as to whether or not he should speak. However, he was unable to halt his actions. "What is the reason for your sentiment?" he inquired. Emily's hand was clenched around the cup and she ceased to move. She did not turn to face him, but her voice, which was both frigid and bitter, pierced the air. "Because of this location, this residence, and this existence. It is all a matter of arrangement. My mother did not marry your father out of affection. She married him because she required stability, someone who could bear the burden she was unable to. And I am merely the baggage she carried with her." Jake's larynx contracted. He was unprepared for her to be so forthright, to abandon the courteous facade of their blended family with such brutal honesty. The meticulously crafted image of harmony that his father had endeavored to establish was disrupted by her words. For the first time, Emily's pointed gaze softened into something hollow, something vulnerable as she turned back to him. "Are you ever under the impression that you are merely a component of someone else's game?" she inquired, her tone becoming more subdued. Jake declined to respond. It was unnecessary for him to do so. Emily nodded slightly as if she had already comprehended the situation. She then exited the kitchen, leaving Jake alone with a tumult of emotions. Jake gazed out the window, where the morning sunlight illuminated the backyard. Following her departure, a query persisted in his chest. What was Emily's true identity? And why did he experience such an overwhelming urge to comprehend her, as if uncovering her truth was an obligation that he could not avoid? At the time, Jake was unaware that this was merely the beginning of a connection that neither of them could have anticipated. The home was eerily empty that afternoon. Jake was seated on the settee in the living room, his gaze fixed on the television. However, his mind was elsewhere. His father and stepmother had dined out, leaving him and Emily alone in the house. Jake was accustomed to evenings like this, as his father was perpetually preoccupied and his stepmother was rarely still. However, Emily's presence created an inexplicable tension that Jake was unable to fully comprehend, causing everything to feel distinct. He heard her footsteps descend the stairs with a deliberate and sluggish pace, as if she were meticulously considering each step. Jake did not turn around, but he could detect her as she entered the living room. He could not help but gaze her way when she sat down in the chair opposite him. Her legs were crossed, and her brown hair was loosely draped over her shoulders. She held a goblet of red wine in her hand. Emily appeared to be from a world that was far removed from his own, distant and unapproachable. "Is this the manner in which you consistently view television?" she remarked. "It appears to be exceedingly monotonous," her tone playful yet tinged with an undercurrent that Jake was unable to discern. Jake attempted to maintain an air of indifference by shrugging. "I am merely passing the time." Although Emily's smile did not quite extend to her eyes, she smirked instead. She took a drink of her wine, her attention briefly diverting to the television before returning to Jake. "Passing the time. How captivating. Do you not have any more pressing matters to attend to?" Jake perceived the sharpness of her words. However, he refrained from responding. He refrained from acknowledging his feelings of unease that had arisen since Emily's arrival. However, his silence appeared to entertain her, propelling her forward. "Is this your consistent demeanor?" she inquired. Her head tilted and her eyes narrowed as if she were examining him. "Do you consistently conceal yourself from all situations?" Jake's expression was clouded as he turned to confront her. "And you? Are you consistently attempting to incite others?" Emily's laughter was more genuine this time. Leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms, she placed her goblet of wine on the coffee table. "Potentially. However, at least I am not falsely claiming otherwise." The two individuals entered a silence that was not at all comfortable. Rather, it was characterized by a sense of tension, akin to a string that had been drawn taut and was on the brink of breaking. Jake endeavored to concentrate on the television. However, Emily's gaze penetrated him, devouring all that was in its path. He was unable to endure it any longer. "What is it that you truly desire?" Jake inquired with a subdued yet steady voice. Emily slightly leaned forward, her eyes glistening with an unidentifiable light. "I have no desire for anything. Quite simply, I am interested in learning more about you." "Who am I?" Jake lightly snorted. "What could be intriguing about me?" Emily did not respond immediately. She gazed at him, her gaze revealing the strata he had constructed over the years to safeguard himself. "Perhaps it is due to your tendency to remain concealed. You inspire me to investigate your true identity." Jake's torso contracted. He was not accustomed to the direct and intense gaze of others. He was unsure of how to respond, but Emily rose from her seat and retrieved her wine glass before he could. She assured me that there was nothing to be concerned about, her voice gentle yet tinged with challenge. "I do not anticipate your response." Jake remained in the living room, bewildered and overwrought, as she exited. He was uncertain as to what to do, but a part of him was unable to allow her to depart in such a manner. He stood and followed her out to the backyard almost instinctively. Her gaze was fixed on the dark sky as she stood under the diffuse glow of the patio light, holding her wine glass. Jake halted a few feet away, hesitant to approach but resolute in his refusal to retreat. "What was the reason for your pursuit of me in this location?" she asked again, but this time her voice was softer, and it caught him off guard. The words caught in his esophagus, causing Jake to hesitate. "I am uncertain." Emily's blue eyes were illuminated by the feeble light as she turned to face him. "Are you unaware? That is peculiar. I was under the impression that you were always aware of your desires." Jake emitted a brief, arid chuckle. "And you? Are you consistently aware of your desires?" Jake could sense Emily's presence as she approached, a force that was almost overwhelming and enveloping, rendering him immobile. "It is possible that I do. Or perhaps I am simply attempting to resolve the matter." Jake did not respond. They stood there, their gazes fixed on a moment that seemed impossibly significant. Emily was so close to him that he could feel her breath against his skin before he realized it, and he was unaware of who had leaned in first. She then spoke, her voice scarcely rising above a whisper. "Have you ever considered the possibility that certain endeavors are still worthwhile, despite their faults?" Jake declined to respond. He was incapable of doing so. Before he could even comprehend the situation, Emily leaned in, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was so light and ephemeral that it ignited a deep within him that he could not deny. The embrace was brief. However, it was sufficient to alter everything. Emily's irises were alight with an emotion that Jake was unable to identify when she retreated. Perhaps sadness or something considerably more intricate. She said tenderly, her gaze never leaving his, "We both know this is a mistake. Yet who is concerned?" Jake was left standing there with his pulse pounding and his thoughts in a state of chaos as she turned and walked away. He was certain that this moment would remain with him indefinitely, and that it was only the beginning regardless of his feelings. Jake was aware that something had changed. Everything seemed to have been flipped upside down since the instant Emily kissed him in the garden. The memory of that kiss lingered over them like a heavy, unspoken secret, saturating the very walls of the house, and the air seemed to freeze every time their eyes met. However, the tension was not limited to Jake and Emily. Ryan, Jake's closest friend, had begun to detect an anomaly. Ryan, a forthright individual, was unable to disregard Jake's peculiar conduct over the past few weeks. Jake, who was naturally reticent, now appeared to make an effort to avoid Ryan's gaze whenever Emily entered the room. Additionally, Emily? She maintained her typical demeanor, which was characterized by confidence and indifference. However, Ryan began to observe the subtle manner in which she peered at Jake when she believed no one was watching. On Friday evening, the responses were received. Jake, Ryan, Emily, and a few companions had convened at a pub near campus to unwind after a long week. Jake was unable to concentrate, despite the lively hum of music, merriment, and life that permeated the space. Emily's presence at the far end of the table caused him to feel constricted. She donned a straightforward black dress that, despite its simplicity, rendered her appearance effortlessly captivating. Jake was unable to resist the urge to steal a glimpse at her whenever she laughed, despite his awareness that these stolen glances could result in trouble. Ryan, who was seated adjacent to Jake, appeared to perceive it. Ryan's voice lowered as he leaned towards Jake as Emily rose to retrieve an additional beverage. "What is the current status of your relationship with her?" he inquired, partially in jest, but his eyes revealed his anxiety. Jake attempted to deflect by shrugging. "Nothing. She is merely. It is difficult to comprehend." Ryan's expression was one of disbelief as evidenced by his scowl. He stated, "You know, I used to believe that I had feelings for her." His voice became more subdued. "However, I am currently uncertain. She is distinct. Isn't that the case?" Ryan's suspicions were further validated by Jake's failure to respond. Ryan made the decision to act a few hours later as the group began to disband in order to return home. Ryan followed Jake as he stood up to depart at a distance. Jake disappeared into the alley behind the bar, and Emily reappeared moments later, much to his surprise. He observed this. Ryan's pulse was palpitating as he froze. He approached with caution, ensuring that he remained concealed in the shadows while remaining close enough to observe. Then he saw it. Emily and Jake faced each other in the subdued light of the streetlights. Ryan was unable to hear their remarks, but he was not required to do so. He observed Emily's approach and Jake's refusal to retreat. Subsequently, Emily plainly approached him and kissed him. Not a fleeting, benign kiss, but a genuine, emotion-charged embrace that shattered every boundary they were not intended to cross. Ryan was astounded by the sight before him. His chest heaved as he abruptly turned away. Ryan's most trusted confidant, Jake, had not only deceived his family but also abducted the woman with whom he had secretly aspired to have a relationship. Ryan was uncertain as to how to address the emotional turmoil that was raging within him. Ryan confronted Jake the following day. After class, they remained in the vacant basketball court, shielded from inquisitive eyes. Ryan's expression was characterized by a combination of disappointment and wrath as he crossed his arms. Jake was able to comprehend the subject matter without the need for any verbal communication. He could observe it in Ryan's expression. "Do you believe that I failed to observe?" Ryan's voice was scarcely contained as he spoke, his fury simmering. "I observed you and Emily last night." Jake was paralyzed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words emerged. "Jake, what are you thinking?" Ryan's voice grew increasingly elevated as he continued. "She is your stepsister. She is a member of her household. Additionally, Did you kiss her? What methods could you employ to accomplish this?" Jake experienced a sense of being encircled. "Ryan, it is not as straightforward as you may believe," he stated, his voice trembling. "Is it not straightforward?" Ryan's laughter was acrid. "Then provide me with an explanation. How does an event of this nature transpire? Did you consider your father at all? How about your family? Do you believe that I am unaware of all of this?" Jake for the first time lost control, causing his voice to break as he bellowed. "Ryan, I am aware. I am aware that this is incorrect. I am aware of the severity of the situation. However, I am unable to cease. Ryan, I am unable to cease." Ryan remained silent for a brief period, as his wrath gradually transitioned into a more profound emotion. "Disappointment." "Jake," he whispered, his voice strained. "This is not solely about you and Emily. This will bring about the dissolution of your family. And if you do not cease, I cannot guarantee that I will maintain this information confidentially." Ryan turned and strode away, leaving Jake alone with the crushing weight of his words. Jake stood there watching. Jake was aware that Ryan was correct. However, the one thing he was unsure of was how to let Emily go, as he found it impossible to breathe without her every time he saw her. The home had never been so frigid. The walls, which were once alive with the warmth of ordinary family conversations, now are echoed only by the ticking of the clock and a silence that feels oppressive. Jake sat on the edge of his bed, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He replayed the confrontation with Ryan from the day before in his mind indefinitely, as if it were a broken record that was stuck on its most excruciating refrain. He was cognizant that the situation was deteriorating and that a resolution was imminent. However, what would be the implication of that conclusion? Emily, the sole individual who elicited a sense of vitality in him, was also the one who entangled him in a vortex of agony. Ryan, his closest companion, now gazed upon him with feelings of betrayal and disappointment. And most importantly, there was his father, the individual who had consistently anticipated that Jake would be morally upright and behave appropriately. It was as though the entirety of it, the weight of everyone's expectations and the chaos he had wrought, was suffocating him, rendering him unable to breathe. Softly, a knock interrupted the silence. Jake's pulse halted as he gazed upward and observed Emily standing in the doorway. Her simple attire, consisting of a loose jumper and jeans, only served to emphasize her attractiveness, rendering it impossible for him to turn his gaze elsewhere. Her penetrating blue eyes were devoid of their customary sharpness and defiance for the first time. Rather, they harbored an immense sorrow that threatened to consume him. Emily stated with a calm yet determined tone, "We must converse." Jake nodded, and Emily entered the room, closing the door behind her. She sat on the bed beside him, her hands held together as if she were attempting to stabilize herself. A prolonged period of silence ensued between them, laden with unspoken realities. Finally, Emily managed to break it. She stated, "I am aware that the situation is spiraling out of control," her gaze remaining fixated on the ground. "Additionally, I am aware we are unable to continue in this manner." Jake experienced a sudden intense agony in his chest. "Emily, I am apprehensive about losing you." Emily turned to him, her eyes shimmering as if on the brink of weeping. "Is it your opinion that I would prefer that? Do you believe that I am willing to relinquish the sole item that has provided me with the conviction that I am not alone?" Jake clasped her hands, his gaze beseeching her. "Therefore, refrain from doing so. We can devise a solution. We can devise a solution to preserve the family, you, and the entirety of the situation." Emily gently shook her head, a bittersweet smile forming on her lips. "Jake, this is not solely about us. It pertains to your father, my mother, and the foundation of this family. Do you truly believe that they will ever perceive us in the same way again if they discover the truth?" Jake declined to respond. He was incapable of doing so. He was aware of the answer, and acknowledging it was akin to stabbing himself in the heart. Emily stood and proceeded to the window as she gingerly released her hands from his. She gazed into the black sky where faint stars flickered like fading embers. Emily's voice broke as she spoke. "I have contemplated this matter for an extended period of time. I have contemplated all potential methods of achieving this. However, the more I contemplate, the more I come to the realization we are unable to. At least not at this time." Jake approached her, walking in close enough proximity to sense her presence but refraining from making physical contact. "Emily, I will not be able to endure if you depart. I am unable to exist without you." Emily's eyes were filled with weeping as she turned to him. "Jake, it is feasible for you. You are more resilient than you realize. And perhaps one day, when the weight of all of this is lifted, when we are no longer a burden to one another, we will reunite once more." Jake's voice broke as he shook his head. "I am unwilling to delay. You are required immediately. Right here. Accompanying me." Emily smiled, a smile that was both tender and melancholy. She reached up to delicately place her hand on his cheek. Her touch was warm and comforting, yet it felt like a farewell. Jake, occasionally, the act of loving someone necessitates their departure. Not because you desire to, but because it is the sole method of preventing the two of you from disintegrating. Jake's eyes were filled with desperation as he gazed at her. However, he refrained from uttering a word as he was aware that she was correct. Emily departed the following day. Her mother stated that she desired to return to New York to further her education and discover her own path. No one in the family expressed any further thoughts on the matter. However, Jake was aware of the truth. This was her method of safeguarding them both from total ruin. He observed the automobile exiting the driveway from his bedroom window. Emily and Jake did not exchange a wave, and Emily did not glance back. Nevertheless, he perceived a rupture within himself, a vital component that he was uncertain he could ever regain. Weeks transformed into months. Life progressively returned to its usual rhythm, or at least it appeared to. However, Jake would hesitate for a moment each time he passed the balcony where he had first heard Emily's guitar, as if anticipating a return. It is possible that Emily was correct. Perhaps one day, when circumstances were more manageable, they would reunite. However, at present, Jake was limited to performing the sole task that he was capable of. Despite the fact that each step was laden with the memory of an individual he could never forget, He continued to advance. Jake was aware that Emily, regardless of her location, carried a portion of him. Forever. Like what you heard. There's plenty more heartbreak and secrets to come. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious with Tangled Truths.